Anthropic just shipped this particular new feature called routines in Claude Code. And in today's video, I want to break down what this feature really entails on the bigger picture, why Anthropic is pushing so many different features at this very moment, and really then broadening up the scope as well. Like, for example, Levels.io really famously tweeted yesterday that essentially the whole world is going to be materially different because Anthropic is really also pushing into some niche use cases, and that's exactly why it is going to be increasingly difficult as an AI builder, as an AI entrepreneur to really be competing with these large players, because ultimately back before we had artificial intelligence, all these SaaS players were usually targeting a rather high ticket price point. And now essentially you have all these AI companies and they're also competing now on the same pie. But in today's video, once again, first let's quickly talk about what actually dropped by Anthropic, then reiterating just the play on, yes, it is becoming an incredibly competitive landscape to be an AI builder and to build in artificial intelligence. And then actually I'm trying to derive an argument why the bigger pie might actually still be very much worth to pursue in this new world of agentic artificial intelligence. So let's quickly go back to the drop by Anthropic. What was actually shipped? Once again, we see more and more push by Anthropic into so-called workable agentic AI interfaces where you can set up routines, you can set up automation, something we have seen most of the time by some wrappers, for example, Langdoc and or similar companies, that are in essence basically building on top of the large language models and have some sort of an intelligent routing. Now, with all these builds that is Anthropic shipping by themselves, of course, they're pushing a lot of these startups out of business. They also shipped some Word document integrations, of course, that is coming. And at the end of the day, we've seen that with managed agents. I think it is quite clear that they're not only attacking the high ticket price points, but also the very much mid-level tiers. And that's exactly why, once again, Levels.io put this tweet out in the sense that, yes, the end game is essentially that all these large AI players, it's kind of a winner takes it all. And if it's not Anthropic, then maybe OpenAI or Microsoft or Google will. And you as an AI builder, you might have some struggle to really be competing in these, even though there might be niche use cases, once again, against these large players. But let me quickly just rephrase that in also maybe this slide. Where are we and why potentially, yes, this argument might be completely true, but it's still, I would say, a fundamental opportunity for AI builders to still build in this domain while we have these large players. Ultimately, we're moving from a SaaS total addressable market. I've just more or less assumed this is sub 1 trillion in terms of market, to a particularly completely different vehicle on a P&L. So let me quickly walk you through this argumentation. So if you are building and or purchasing as a company software as a service, for example, 4 to 5 years ago, this was usually going into the IT budget. So you had to talk and sell to the CIO, convince the CIO and CISO or any particular security person, taking away from this software budget and giving that to you as a software seller in that particular context. Now, we see a move from, again, software selling seats. One particular software was, for example, selling 4 or 10 seats at a particular firm. Let's say for simplicity reason, it was 1 million for all these seats. Agents are in essence selling work. So the work output that was being delivered by humans, that's exactly why we see this trend shifting from IT budgets to FTE budgets. And that entirely, even for us AI builders, opens a completely new P&L view. The way you would sell to an enterprise any particular agentic solution could be, for example, for a niche use case you might have in mind, for law, for marketing, for sales, for some very specific inspection software that is now running essentially like you would have a human in the past. You would try to get labor budgets or FTE or human-based budgets basically for their sale. So let me quickly rephrase that once again. In the SaaS world, you are charging per seat. Most of the time now in the agentic world, you're essentially charging for outcomes. So your pricing model or your business model essentially is outcome-based pricing, because ultimately you're basically replacing part of the FTE hours or human-based hours and not desktop tools. That's really the material shift. So the total addressable market, I think, has been underestimated on artificial intelligence more than a dozen of times. And I think even now, despite, yes, it is incredibly difficult to compete with Anthropic and OpenAI coming into these very much niche use cases where entrepreneurs hang out and the more or less yearly addressable ticket was, for example, 100K or a little bit less than 10K a month. But ultimately, that was still in consideration that the actual pie is not going to be increasing. That's the whole argument I'm trying to make today. Now, from an AI builder perspective, what I would certainly focus on is if you have any particular use case, of course, this needs customization. You can't simply just click on a purchase button and you get on Anthropic everything you would want to have as an enterprise. You would still ideally need to have some sort of a context load across multiple AI software systems. You probably have some sort of connector landscape that you can still engineer as an AI builder for these particular enterprises. And you can actually do that very much hands-on with a client. So being present, I think still in the age of AI is incredibly a valuable asset. Then a huge one is, of course, you would be building domain-specific, very deep expert skills, something that Anthropic just actually shipping the domain intelligence cannot compete with, at least at this very moment. So skills is still very much, I would say, a differentiator on top of the connector landscape that you might be particularly engineering for one of your clients. And of course, the intelligence has to come from somewhere. And ultimately, there is some sort of a trend, I would say, that intelligence most of the time that's been spoken now is going to be fully commoditized, meaning every enterprise has the same intelligence, same model, or at least the same substrate of models, 2-3 running probably in the background. For now, it's Anthropic. In 2-3 years, it might be entirely a different player once again. But you will probably still need to go into these enterprises and deliver the intelligence, mostly being commoditized. And that's more or less it, what Anthropic currently is delivering. The agent is basically in-house. It's now addressing the labor budgets. It's somewhat replacing certain FTE hours. It's augmenting humans. It's putting humans in the loop, but ultimately making them more productive, yielding more precise and better outcomes at their work. What is then missing from your perspective as an AI builder that can still come in and deliver substantially more value these days is with upskilling. Not the entire workforce is AI native, you mostly are as an AI builder. A lot of change management needs to happen, moving again from all these software oriented tooling decisions to now really have a human augmentation. So a lot of change management, a lot of process alignments. Once again, a service after the sale you as an AI builder can offer as well. And then of course, we've seen that now really deeply with the rollout of Copilot, of Anthropic, really going into these large enterprises at, I would say, costs that potentially could balloon just 1 or 2 model releases from today. Because if we see one trend in artificial intelligence, it's that essentially the models per se, yes, they might get a little bit cheaper to run, but we use them significantly more. So cost management, having all the metrics into place and productivity, ROIs is certainly something you can dashboard and help your particular target client or ICP. So that was a little bit it for the video. We took a bit of a deep tour based on this very new release because ultimately Anthropic is targeting new niches. We walked you through quickly, I would say, the worst case scenario for AI builders and for startups being fully commoditized away from these very large big tech companies. But ultimately, I would say the pie is much bigger than we believe it is true today. And we have been proven wrong more than once that this is actually the true scenario for artificial intelligence. So with that said, for the video, just a quick wrap up, and I see you in the next one. Take care.